Morning.
How we doing? Good morning.
How are you?
Very good, thanks.
Good. A lot to talk about this morning. Most companies that talk about APIs think about the API as an outward-facing mechanism that connects a company or a piece of software to the broader world. Mm-hmm. And you have a completely different take on the API. You are gazing inward. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, probably anyone who's a developer, anyone in the audience that has written any apps in the last few years, you would have used the open APIs on the web. So the 17,000 APIs that are building blocks for doing everything from facial recognition to telephony to deep learning algorithms. They're all available through these public APIs. Where enterprises are really struggling is they have a treasure trove of assets and capabilities within their organization, but they're using people to leverage those assets. Mm-hmm. So our focus on APIs is really to help every organization open up their value and create internal API economies so they can start freeing up the data and assets that they have. I mean, these things want to be free. They should be there and available for driving innovation. So it's just not there today.
Is this really about making the organization itself, the business itself, more agile?
It is. Yeah, almost every company I speak to, the first thing they say is they want to move faster, they want to be able to make changes more quickly. They can't do it. If your core of your business is a ball of mud, then
a ball of
mud, you know, that kind of it all just mushed together.
I can imagine what that's going to look like.
It's pretty awful.
I can imagine it.
Yeah, so they're dealing with that, and they're trying to make changes with a very opaque view of what they have available, what's in the organization. And APIs, what it starts to do is break down that ball of mud into composable services. And that's really just the key to it, is just how do you break that down and make those assets more available so people can build value on top of those building blocks, those APIs.
Can we back up for just, say, 90 seconds? You mentioned this concept of the API economy. What is that?
So, I mean, simply, it's the exchange of value between providers and consumers. The economy is that exchange, right? And with APIs, it's Google and Google Maps. That's what they provide, and the consumers take that, like Uber, Airbnb, and they plug it into their applications. That exchange of value is the economy. What's interesting about that economy, we're just getting started, right? We really have no idea where it's going to go yet. But if you think about every app on your phone, that's talking to hundreds and hundreds of APIs in the background and creating new consumer experiences. There's value there. And what enterprises are trying to figure out is how do they plug themselves into that economy and start adding more of their own value.
You've been at this a while. Can you give us a few examples of what this looks like in practice?
Yeah, so we had our conference a couple of weeks ago. We had Wells Fargo up on stage. They're like a 150-year-old bank. If you're in the US, you know who they are. And they're radically changing their capital markets business. So things like foreign exchange, things like personal loans. Instead of having people and big heavyweight processes to go and originate loans or to perform foreign exchange transactions, what they're doing is they're breaking up those systems into small component pieces, right? So if I want to verify a transaction or I want to verify a consumer for a loan, rather than having to go through this one big ball of mud, I have different services I call to make that transaction happen. And for Wells Fargo, they've started breaking this down, and it wasn't to open up APIs externally, it was actually to open up the capability internally so they could offer more products and services and cross-sell more capabilities within their own organization.
So it's more of a unified set of standards internally?
Pretty much, but I mean, it's just APIs. I mean, they're just building blocks, but now anyone in Wells Fargo can go and discover services that provide things like loan origination or a foreign exchange transaction and go and build new value-added services on top of it.
And that helps the company, in theory, at least scale?
It definitely helps them scale because they were talking about just the time it now takes to build new products and services or change products and services. Change is a big cost factor in most systems. Like it might take 5 months to build the first version of an app, but if it takes another 5 months to create version 1.1, that's a huge problem. That means you're not being able to react quickly.
How do you manage this internally, or how does say Wells Fargo manage this internally? Is there a senior vice president for app or app economy?
So what tends to happen is there will be a new group set up that is focused on really curating and setting the standards for API delivery within the organization. And then depending on the organization, it may be one team or a distributed team of people that build APIs for different parts of the business, right? So typically if you own a back-end application like a mainframe or an SAP app, that team would actually own running those APIs in the same way they run the app for the business. If you're more distributed, there might be other teams such as human capital management where they have their own set of processes and systems. They would also build some of their own APIs to access their own internal information.
So if you get this system up and running and the ball of mud is decomposed, what happens to the business model a little bit further down the road after companies experiment with this?
Well, there's some really interesting things that happen with your business once you start to unlock the value, right? So I'll choose a couple of examples. One is you can actually accelerate existing business model and actually start to disrupt the competition. So if you look at someone like Rocket Mortgages, I don't know if you're familiar with those guys. They do mortgage applications over mobile devices, and they can confirm a mortgage within 30 minutes. Now, if you've ever bought a house and had to go through that mortgage process, banks take about 3 to 4 weeks to have that process. There's a lot of paperwork. It's a real nightmare. Sure. Somehow, these guys have just accelerated it and made it 30 minutes. And the way they did that was for all the services around appraisal, around background checks, around all the other flows of information needed to make a mortgage work, they turned that into a set of services, and they just built a mobile app around it and automated the whole thing. And that's been pretty incredible because what it's done is put every other bank under pressure, and we're working with 4 other banks now that are doing exactly the same thing and mimicking that model. So it's kind of powerful that we're enabling the disruptor and the disruptees to really accelerate with APIs. So that's one example. Another one would be someone like Unilever, who they're a big CPG company in Europe, about $60 billion company, and they've always worked as a B2B company. So they sell dishwashing detergents, soaps, ice cream, everything. And what they're realizing is they have about $14 billion plus brands that they need to manage much more effectively, and they want to build more brands. So the way they're looking to do it is go direct to consumer for certain things. And I don't know if you saw the acquisition of Dollar Shave Club by
Yes.
Unilever, or T2, which is a tea company in APAC. But these are direct consumer plays, and the way they're plugging those companies back into their organization, they're not trying to make them look like Unilever. They're actually opening up a set of capabilities, APIs, that allow these companies to plug into Unilever, really as a big SaaS platform.
How dependent upon the API, was this shift to the B2C market?
Absolutely critical. So if we take T2, which is a tea shop, like a Starbucks, but for tea, their plan is they bought 40 stores. They want to open up another 500 in the next 3 years globally. And the only way they can do that fast is if they put all the commerce platform as a set of APIs, and then they just plug each store in any geo into that API and start running the transactions as though they're running in a Unilever system. So again, it wasn't a huge lift, but it's enabled them to move much quicker. Yeah.
So just for the sake of argument, let's assume that I've broken down that big ball of mud at the center of the enterprise. The internal company is working pretty well. Now I want to branch back out again. There's so much going on, new platforms, IoT, so on and so forth. What happens? What happens then?
Well, just imagine. Think about things like IoT or AI or chat interfaces. Those things only work if you can plug them into everything else that matters to your business, right? I mean, think about Amazon Alexa. You send in commands, but in the background, in order for those commands to do anything, you've got to connect to APIs. So all the new technology trends coming down the pipe all rely on APIs to actually function, right? They have a domain that they specialize in, whether it's the algorithm or the packaging of the new interface, but they've got to connect out to these other things. So enterprises, when they start to have these standardized interfaces across lots of different systems, they can start to move quicker, they can start to embrace newer technology without the big upside cost of trying to take one of those new technologies and plug it into the ball of mud. If you've got everything broken up, it gets much easier to start experimenting, it gets much easier to move faster, it gets much easier to cut things off, right? Because if it didn't work, it didn't cost you that much because you didn't have to build everything from scratch.
Well, what does the company need to think about in terms of execution? Can you talk a little bit more about how the company organizes itself, about the skills that are necessary internally, even if the company is working with an outside company such as MuleSoft?
Yeah, I mean, the key to this actually isn't technology, right? I'm a technology vendor. We sell technology, but the conversations we have are actually around how do you organize your people and the processes around delivering APIs in the organization, because it actually changes the dynamic. Like most IT organizations, they deliver projects to the business, and they, over the past few years, they've been running more and more breathlessly on this treadmill to deliver more projects. And shifting to an API model means that instead of delivering projects, you're actually going to deliver something out of that project that's going to live beyond the lifespan of a project. So you need a team there that understands how to run an API lifecycle all the way through, to production and iteration. You need to have a team of people that every morning they wake up and they understand what assets are available in your organization. They evangelize them to the rest of the business. This isn't unlike actually open source projects, right? Just because you build it and it's available doesn't make that an overnight success. You've got to go and evangelize these capabilities to other parts of the organization and take the feedback to understand whether those capabilities are really working for their needs. So there's a lot of coaching and mentoring around how to drive communities internally for APIs to really work. The great thing is the web has shown us what great looks like. If you look at what Stripe has done or what Twilio has done, they've been excellent at executing on not just opening up a set of capabilities, but really driving consumption of those APIs.
So they're starting with a green field, though. If I'm Twilio, I don't have, in theory, I shouldn't be starting life with a big ball of mud.
No.
You have a really broad lens on what's going on in the corporate world. Just very generally, what are you hearing from the companies that you work with, from the CIOs and the CEOs and the business leaders? What are their big priorities and concerns?
Yeah, good question. I mean, could probably spend 20 minutes on that, but broadly, I think every company in every industry is feeling the pressure, right? Pressure of the newer technology trends that have created new dynamics within their organization, SaaS and mobile in particular being a big challenge because most organizations had everything in their data center. Now, in fact, their whole application landscape gets turned inside out, and they're using SaaS platforms, they're using Amazon and Azure, and they're trying to figure out how to connect it all back in together into one cohesive environment. They also want to move faster, and they're trying to figure out what do I need to do to move faster? Do I keep doing what I'm doing, but just cheaper and as quickly as possible, or is there a better way? And our approach to this is there's no way you can keep up with all the demands from the rest of the business to connect all these applications together unless you start to restructure yourself around an internal API economy where you allow more self-service of assets and data within your own organization. It also then makes it much easier to start opening up some of those assets to other communities outside the business.
I'm just curious, who specifically do you sell to? Is it the CIO? Is it the business head, the CEO? I'm just curious to know, how far up the food chain the consciousness of these really hardcore technology issues goes.
Yeah, so the CIO is the constant thread, but what I've noticed in certain industries that are getting disrupted, like financial services, they're traveling in threes. It's usually the CEO, the COO, and then the CIO together. And it's a pretty good mix because the CEO owns the business strategy, the CIO owns the technology strategy. What they're starting to realize is those two things are becoming almost the same thing, right? If you look at strategies for banks, 8 out of 10 of the strategies in the next 5 years require technology. And then the operating officers there to really ask the hard questions about, okay, well, if we do this, what do we need to do to our organization to make it work? What's the change control that we need to put in place, things like that. But it is definitely the CIO's role to really champion this, but it's smarter if you bring your CEO into the conversation because they want to know should they get behind this as a big initiative? Is it something, what does it do to the business when we have this type of capability of APIs within the organization?
You've had a rather large and significant event in your recent history. How is life as a public company?
It's great. It's been a lot of fun. For us, if you just look at what we're doing, we're taking on a really big market problem, right? There's about $400 billion spent every year by companies on system integrators that are just there connecting applications and data and devices together. That's probably the largest unproductized IT spend out there. And as a company, we're just, as a public company, even when we're private, we're just laser focused on how do we enable enterprises to think differently about connecting these systems and data together, because frankly, every day there's more and more building blocks that people want to use to bring into the enterprise, whether it's Salesforce, Workday, ServiceNow, which are the big ones. But as a company, we have 200 SaaS applications. We don't have a data center, but we have 200 SaaS applications. We have our own integration challenges that we need to deal with. Of course, we use MuleSoft, but the focus for us, even in the public market, is to keep solving that problem and hopefully reduce the complexity.
You've done something that many people aspire to. You've grown a company. Any thoughts? Can you share any thoughts, any insight on how to make that happen?
You need, it's just a lot of hard work. It's a bit of luck. I think focusing on really big problems makes a massive difference, because it's harder in the beginning because people don't always see the edges of the problem, but it's easier at our scale to take on a much more prominent role in the market. I think for founders, I think the key thing is you've got to love what you're doing. If you wake up every morning and you don't feel like getting out of bed, that's probably an early warning sign that you're maybe not working on the right problem.
What do you do to motivate people and to keep the team moving forward?
So for us, hiring is probably the most important activity we do as a company, and there's good alignment across every layer in the organization that bringing the best people in actually motivates the workplace. So we do a lot around thinking about what our culture needs to be as we scale. Like, we'll hire another 500 people this year probably, and that worries me, right? Like, how do we retain some of our smaller cultural values as we get a bigger organization? We do things like a lot of transparency in terms of what the company sees. We keep a pretty flat hierarchy. We like to keep the doors open for any conversation. And I think we give people a lot of context of what we're trying to do. We're very clear on our mission. We're very clear on how we want to get there. And then we give people autonomy to go and figure out the best path to get there within their role or around their organization.
Great. We're out of time. I think we'll have to leave it right there.
Okay.
Thank you.